Tensions are rising in the Russian army occupying Ukraine. The vast majority of Russian soldiers have raised the flag of rebellion. Russia is not in a position to cope with these rebellions. The army is in danger of disintegrating. So why is Russia so confused? What are the consequences of revolts in the Russian army? Let's find the answers to these questions together. The war started on February 24. Since then, there has been an uprising in the army almost every day. Russian soldiers do not want to participate in the war with Ukraine. There are very few people in Russia who support this war. When Putin started the war, he did not have the support of the majority of the soldiers in the Russian army. Therefore, Russian soldiers were forced to go to Ukraine, or rather, they were sent. Russian commanders had a very difficult time because of the soldiers who did not want to go to Ukraine. The commanders doubt that Ukraine would surrender and not engage in an armed conflict. This was based on the confidence that Russia had the second largest army in the world. No one expected Ukraine to resist Russia. As soon as Putin decided to invade, all eyes turned to the Ukrainian leader Zelensky. Zelensky, who took office in 2019, surprised the whole world with his statements. Saying that they will never allow Russia to take over Ukraine, Zelensky announced that the Ukrainian army will resist this invasion to the end. This statement increased the motivation and courage of the Ukrainian army. It caused a great panic among the Russian soldiers. Russian soldiers who panicked after Zelensky's statements went to their commanders, but the commanders could not say anything. Ukraine's resistance surprised Russian commanders too. This was the first big disappointment among Russian soldiers. The Ukrainian army, which showed a very successful resistance against the Russian operations, managed to stop the Russians on the west bank of the Dnipro River. In this process, it started to carry out strategic operations. It monitored all movements in the areas captured by Russia with drones. These drones detected all ammunition depots of the Russian army. The Ukrainian army attacked these areas using HIMARS. Thus, most of the ammunition depots of the Russian army were destroyed. There was a succession of explosions at Russian bases. This created a great panic among Russian soldiers. It is known that many soldiers fled from the army in the process. Riots also broke out in many regions. As a result of the operations of the Ukrainian army, the stocks of the Russian army started to run out. Most of the food stocks of Russian soldiers have been largely depleted. The needs of Russian soldiers cannot be met. Soldiers did not have enough to eat and wore clothes that were not suitable for war. When these problems were shared with the commanders, no solution could be found. In the army, 2,500 soldiers revolted, telling their commanders about their problems, because at that time the Russian commander was very drunk and did not pay attention to any of the soldiers' demands. After this incident in Kazan, Russia, soldiers who challenged their commanders were confronted by riot police. One soldier posted on social media, "The general was rude and drunk. He reacted very harshly to our demands and filed a complaint." The rebel soldier also added the following, "We have rusty machine guns from the 1970s. It is very dangerous to shoot with them." The Russian army is facing a huge arms stockpile problem after the explosion of ammunition depots. Russian soldiers do not have enough weapons. In addition, the Ukrainian army has confiscated Russian weapons in many regions. Russian soldiers have left many areas as a result of Ukrainian raids. All the weapons in these regions are now in the hands of the Ukrainian army. Trying to solve this problem, the Russian army opened military warehouses left over from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The weapons in these warehouses were distributed to Russian soldiers. However, these weapons were very old and rusty. They also jammed frequently and caused many accidents. These rusty weapons were one of the biggest reasons why Russian soldiers who did not want to fight with the existing weapons revolted. This is not the only problem in the Russian army. One of the problems reported by the revolting Russian soldiers is that their requests to meet their families are always denied. After the major defeat in Ukraine, Russian leader Putin declared a mobilization order. and forcibly conscripted 300,000 soldiers into the army. However, Russian citizens did not like the mobilization decision at all. Young men who could have been drafted into the army started to leave Russia. Long queues formed at Russia's borders. Also, many Russian citizens left the country unofficially. The kilometer-long queues at Russia's borders angered Putin. Putin ordered the soldiers to be recruited into the army immediately. After Putin's order, the mobilization decision was immediately implemented. Russian citizens were forcibly recruited into the army, but these citizens had no military training. Russia started to give military training to Russian citizens at military bases in cities such as Kazan and Belgorod. During these trainings, Russian soldiers were forbidden to meet with their families. The pressures made Russian soldiers even more angry. Most of the citizens who were included into the army with the mobilization decision had to quit their jobs. This situation hit the Russian economy very hard. The families of the soldiers are struggling to make ends meet. Russian soldiers say that they should be paid, but the Russian government has not taken any steps in this regard. The families of conscripted soldiers are also participating in protests in the squares of the cities. Recently, 39 soldiers from the 252nd Motorized Rifle Regiment sent to the Luhansk region also raised the flag of rebellion. After the mutiny, the soldiers who escaped from the army made a video and expressed their problems. Russian soldiers say they are not treated well at all. One soldier in the video said they were not even allowed to take a shower. Another soldier said that the water supply ran out at the location where he was stationed, and water could not be supplied for a long time. Russian soldiers were forced to drink water from a puddle. The lack of treatment for wounded soldiers leads to the death of many of them. Russian soldiers are furious that their friends are being left to die. Russian soldiers feel that their lives are being disregarded. Looking at the data, the Russian soldiers are not wrong at all. In the Russian army, 740 soldiers lost their lives in the last 24 hours. The total death toll in the army has already exceeded 96,000. But despite all this, the Kremlin insists on continuing the war, because Russia does not want to accept a defeat. Putin's political career in Russia depends on this war. Putin is currently one of the longest-serving leaders in the world. This war plays a fateful role in his political career. The soldiers revolting in Russia are giving Putin a big shock. Putin, whose power and prestige on home soil is diminishing by the day, was planning a victory in Ukraine to prove himself. However, the historic resistance of the Ukrainian army has upset Putin's plans. If Putin loses this war, he will have to resign from his post. That's why he is doing everything he can to win the war. Even the death of Russian soldiers is not important for Putin. It is becoming increasingly difficult for Putin to win this war, because the rebellions in the Russian army have completely demotivated the soldiers. Russian soldiers do not want to die for Putin. The uprisings in the Russian army are expected to increase. The Kremlin administration is helpless in the face of soldiers' revolts.